And that's good. I'd like to call to order our Public Safety Board and Civil Service Policy Committee meeting. We have a motion to approve the minutes from February 12th.
So moved, Chair.
Second. Second, to approve the minutes. Looks like we move to consent items. Lieutenant Nick Huber, APD, about the Raven MOU.
Yeah, the lieutenant's not here, but I can answer any questions. And also I have our chief on the line too, that he can bounce in and answer any questions he can. And basically what this is, it's a memorandum for our Raven Task Force. Our Raven Task Force is a combination of ATF, HSI, and it's also our Denver metropolitan area police departments. And it's a collaborative that focuses specifically on anti-violence enforcement. And that's what their goal and their mission is. And so basically what this MOU is, it just brings all those parties together. We have multiple jurisdictions from all other cities. We have Denver, we have all the smaller jurisdictions. And then we also have those two federal partners. We focus strictly on violent crime and violent crime alone, the guns. And that's what we focus on, is the reduction in those activities. That's what this MOU basically validates and verifies. And if you have any specific questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them.
Mayor.
Yeah, Chief. So how many personnel are we dedicating to this?
And Chief Hildebrand, you're on the air, and I also, the lieutenant's on the air. If you could jump on and give very much specifics on that.
Yeah, I see Huber on here. Are you able to answer the number of personnel we have out there?
Yes, I can. We have 7 detectives total and 2 sergeants and myself.
And Lieutenant, if you could also give the amount total of everybody in the combined task force, I'd appreciate that. So it gives kind of a perspective of how this is, without question, a collaboration.
Sure, Chief. With the 14 different agencies that have personnel out here, we have about 52 individuals when we're fully staffed.
Thanks.
You have questions for the chief?
I have one. Chief, or maybe Hildebrand or Huber could answer. You said it focuses on specifically violent crime involving guns. Do we do anything cross, like we don't handle any Denver things, they don't handle any our things, it's just specifically us?
No, it goes into Denver, it goes into the smaller jurisdictions because it's a collaborative. It's a group that works in the area. So again, their area of operation is not just specifically to Aurora, but what we find is the majority of the events that occur, there's always some connection back to Aurora. And that is really the benefit of what this group does, because the combination of having all these different entities involved, it's focused on violent crime. And suspects do not know the city boundaries of Aurora or of Arvada or Parker or anywhere else where we are focused our attentions on. And so that is what we really have the opportunity to do, is focus on gangs that impact people, that victimize people in large geographical areas outside of just Aurora, but definitely have an influence and an impact on our crime in Aurora. And Lieutenant, if you want to focus any more on that, please feel free. But I think that's really the message and the point of where we get our value from that.
No, that's absolutely correct, Chief.
So if something occurs here in Aurora and they cross over into Denver and that continues on, we can pursue and, and address that, and vice versa.
Yep.
Okay. That answers my question.
Any other questions? Thank you for that, Chief.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our general business.
Just one point of order.
So there was-
Is there an approval for the agreement?
Oh, we need approval.
Motion for
Yes.
approval. Yep.
Can I get a motion?
I moved, we moved this on to study session.
Second to move the study session. So thank you for that. Now we can go into general business. Trevor, before you start your presentation, I want to make sure that folks know that Trevor's going to give us a brief introduction about from the start to finish here, as we talked about with some of the acronyms and things that are going on, so we understand the full scope of what's happening.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Trevor.
I appreciate that, Councilmember Andrews. I'm Trevor Vaughn, Manager of Licensing, and this is a proposal that Council had seen before and this committee saw back in September. We last talked about it at study session in October, and then had held off after the election to kind of let the new council members get a little bit more prepared for it and get it back into the process. So I'll give a refresher on what this permit is. And since we've got a little bit of time today, I wanted to do a little bit deeper dive into SEPTED, so to help kind of understand the concepts, which are some of the basis behind the thinking, some of the policies here. And that's, I'm too far away, unfortunately, for my clicker to work, so I'll give you a hand signal. All right, thank you. So this is a proposed permit, and unfortunately now coming at it, I think there was some confusion between this and the tobacco retail license ordinance because we both have spacing requirements in it and deal with some of the same businesses. So there is a little bit of overlap, which is contemplated in the design of the permit. The proposal here is addressing what we deal with what we call high-risk businesses. These sometimes are referred to as poverty industry in some circles, but you know, because oftentimes what they'll do is cluster in areas of challenged economics. There's some recommendations from the American Planning Association in addressing where those things are able and allowed to cluster and have impacts in those communities. And so they have a role to play in society, and they're allowed, but having them concentrated, which is what we're talking about, is what this permit's designed to address in the long term. And so when concentrated, we kind of talk about some of these impacts and feel that you get in some of these areas where you have the concentration of these types of businesses. Next slide. As mentioned, preventing the clustering of it, you know, and kind of reducing those competitive pressures. Sometimes in some of these industries, what you can see is, for example, if you kind of cluster liquor stores together, it may create a competitive pressure to kind of, you know, maybe to sell some products that are more harmful to the community or market in certain ways or not maintain your outlet as well, is one example, or check cashing, you know, for example, vape stores and what products they're selling in those. So by spreading them out, reducing that concentration, there's evidence that can help a community and introduce a more balanced retail environment. Next slide. So the operations we looked at, and there's been studies on a lot of these and restrictions, not only here in Aurora, but throughout the country on spacing of these types of businesses. Talking about, you know, the list there, I won't read the whole thing. And then also kind of addressing the late night bars that are areas, what we call areas of elevated risk, which will be determined through a scientific risk train modeling software, which we propose as part of this permit. And so the approach here is to attach it to the general business license, try to make it really streamlined so that initial issuance of the permit just will be free, just will happen. And then upon renewal, it just gets renewed with the general business license as they go through that. So trying to keep it administratively simple. And then not addressing this through zoning, just from kind of approaching it of a different aspect, that we also want to deal with some of the operational considerations of these businesses, particularly when they're in areas of what we call elevated risk, and making sure that they're staying clean and helping add to the community and not detract from it. Next slide. So what's in here, want to highlight that we would include convenience stores if they sell alcohol or tobacco as a specific category in this permit. From that definition, we excluded both large format and small healthy grocery stores to try to encourage those, as they sometimes these areas are food deserts. So we want to try to help encourage these operations to be in there. I will say the small healthy grocery stores, the way we've defined that, we actually looked at some of these operations, and their, you know, tobacco operations is very secondary to their other operations. And usually they just have a few products there to try to make it a one-stop shop. Including vape shops as the category, there's an adjustment here for specialty secondhand dealers. So we exclude secondhand dealers that are really kind of specialized retailers, like dealing in comics and stuff like that, rather than being kind of the more classic pawn shop where there's the high risk of fencing of stolen goods. We're using the major transit intersections. So we just talked about major transit intersections, having them included as a reference point for distance from those transit junctions. So that these types of businesses don't cluster around those transit junctions, because we've seen that can cause a correlation with an increased riskier environment. And then again, mentioning those high risk after midnight uses just in those areas where we have the most concern. So this is based on kind of the core and thinking behind this, crime prevention through environmental design, those concepts. These are place-based, multidisciplinary crime strategies. So not involving not just the police department, but multiple departments in the city, licensing, code enforcement, and really approaching safety, risk, and crime as a jurisdiction-wide approach. And so CEPTED is the kind of the basis on that. Risk terrain modeling is another approach where we are talking about correlating risky places and doing a map of kind of where crime occurs and what types of uses it tends to occur around. And that can both help inform your policing strategies, but also broader based strategies in how you address it from an entire organization. Do you go in there and do additional lighting, address code enforcement, clean the area up with public works, various strategies, social work, those types of things to try to address the location. And so I highlighted those two because that's really what we're talking about here. Police network investigations is another strategy really focused on violent crime, but it's very police intensive, requiring surveillance. So really the first two. So CEPTED is really what we talk about is this is the definition, and it's just using that built environment to address crime and the fear of crime. Both can detract from an area and lead to a higher crime environment. So go ahead, next slide. And so this is from right off the website from the national company that does training and certification in CEPTED. I am CEPTED certified. I went through the 60 hours of training. A bunch of city staff did as well, including from code enforcement, planning, the Office of People and Belonging, kind of throughout the organization to try to start to build in some of these concepts and approaches because there are different roles that each discipline can play in that. So it's not actually target hardening. It's not aggressive surveillance. It's just cameras don't really replace natural surveillance. And it's not, and this is what it said on their website, not a policing strategy, though usually police are the ones that are the ones getting the certification. The problem is it's not really an enforcement strategy. And a lot of times this has to be taken into account when the built environment is constructed, because police end up with the environment as it is and then have to deal with whatever consequences or enforcement that come from that. And that's why I'm talking about it from licensing, and actually in a lot of jurisdictions, the police department may not even head up the CEPTED program. In Albuquerque, it's the fire department. So having that, some places it's planning. So kind of dealing with it from those multi-disciplines. It's not hospital architecture. It should be a place that's welcoming to activity, welcoming to people, supports people, the types of things we're talking about, and it's not about controlling people. So next slide. CEPTED is actually incorporated a lot, particularly in Florida. It's incorporated into the state statutes in some cases where, for example, they had a recent state statute down there that apartment building owners can face additional civil liability if somebody is a victim of crime, and they didn't implement CEPTED measures. And so very common in there. We do have it integrated in several places in Colorado. In Commerce City here, they talk about, they adopted a CEPTED ordinance incorporating the concept into their design process, and Lakewood has it in one of their licensing codes, and we actually put it in the tobacco retailer licensing code as well. So like I mentioned, very widely adopted by ordinance. Multiple countries use it, and then I mentioned the training. So multidisciplinary, I already kind of covered this, just kind of the different aspects that you can approach it from. Go ahead, keep going through. It's kind of examples here of where we've done some enforcement. Payless Liquors, I think, is very well known, but they had boarded up the windows. The problem is in this created environment that encouraged loitering, and even security cameras just don't substitute for that, and I've seen cases where I've seen minors loitering in front of the liquor stores, and it kind of you can address that by putting windows in there, and that discourages that behavior, and then also encouraging this liquor store to pick up the trash, and that did have improvement on that area. So that's kind of an example of that.
Is that how it looks now?
That's how it look at the windows now. Yeah, at some point they just had boarded up the windows for whatever reason, and I know sometimes liquor stores just will completely placard it with that, and it's not compliant with their zoning codes, which require some window frontage. And here's just kind of cleaning up this shop, you had the bar there at one time, and
Oh, wow.
you had an officer involved shooting in the parking lot of the bar. And then, just the change where we talked about this building. We talked about this specifically when retail development went in and invested some money in there. It's like, that place needs windows. And so, you can really clean it up, and the feel you get when that change happens. So it's about kind of the feel of the area. There's another image we took by one of the extended occupancy hotels where, they've let the bush go out of control. Landscaping is a huge part of SEPTED. And we talked about, I'm talking about with the Rone, who also went through the training, out here, you got the bushes that are very high, so you can kind of hide back in there. So, what you want to do is cut that landscaping between 2 and 6 feet, leave that clear, and it just changes not only the ability for somebody to hide, but the feel of the area as well. Again, just cleaning it up. This is just part of the concept, natural access control. How are people getting in and out? You may not want them getting through this area. These are just some images I tried to grab of the city of just kind of understanding, how you direct people and direct the flow and just mainly about the feel and where people are going to be. So, talk about territorial reinforcement. Sometimes fences, we like fences that you can see through that look nice. This was one, that had been added at this location, which we've had some challenges with in the past, and just ways to kind of help secure the area. But you want it to look good and not be a hiding point either. So Colfax and Havana is something I think we're familiar with all the challenges we've had at that location. And when we talk about a SEPTED committee or SEPTED group, one of the first things we did when we had the 90-day challenge from Chief Acevedo at the time, go out to the location, got everybody out here, met right on the corner and said, okay, let's not just deal with it just as a policing matter. Let's look up the area, kind of what happened, maybe what other things, other disciplines can address. Ultimately, the police obviously have played a huge role in addressing this as well as RTD police, but just trying to get everybody on the same page, including RTD, where we had a number of discussions about the design of the bus stops and, cost considerations come into play. But, this is an older bus stop, the problem is it's kind of set back in there where you got the newer bus stops that are being installed, which have lighting cameras, the clear glass in them. So they're not places where people are kind of living in, they're being used for what they're supposed to be used for transit. But also highlighting this center is that when this was originally constructed, it then had this dead space right in here, and then had the back of the building facing the main intersection. So you have no windows in there. And so what we ended up having was a large congregation here of drug loitering and drug activity in this back of this building. And so some changes were already made here. RTD works really hard to keep it clean. They put the fencing in to get that territorial reinforcement. The lighting was substantially improved. So at night, it's very bright there. Different methodologies to try to help the area, territorial reinforcement on the side there as well to help clean that up. So
Wasn't this a mural work also done?
there was, yeah, I got it in a later slide here, and mural, glad you bring that up. I'll get to it here in a second. So activity support, you want to try to get positive activity in the area. Your Fletcher Plaza, you had an event in there, and just trying to encourage positive behavior and community gathering. So slide. So again, Colfax and Havana, just talking about kind of the initial site design. When you had this parking lot here, it's really kind of excess parking, and it's kind of a dead zone that's not really well surveilled, fences around here. And we end up with food trucks here that aren't licensed, didn't have permission. When Walgreens was open, didn't have permission to set up there, but they'd just be set up there operating. Walgreens didn't even know. You had accountants back here, you had some drug dealing, and then even around the backside of the Walgreens, it's just kind of a canyon back in there, and you had a lot of, I was driving through there, and pretty much every time I go through there, there was drug use happening there, and a lot of activity behind that area where it's probably some better designs initially to kind of help that, and you can kind of see this throughout that area. Maintenance is very important. Again, broken window things. If we had a lot of trash here on the floor, you probably feel more comfortable throwing your trash on the floor. So taking care of the area, making it feel safe, and not to just pick on the city a little bit if I'm gonna pick on some businesses. You know, there's some maintenance issues again, just having money. And I know this sign's been removed and, you know, the tree here is blocking the front of the building. That tree's been removed, you know, it's actually knocking into the building. So just again, keeping up with maintenance in the area. There's that Century Square mural. They do find that public art, again, making the area feel welcome, cared for. Public art does have, you know, encouraging the community and does actually have a crime deterrence effect. This mural was kind of selected particularly because it's got a bunch of eyes in it. Since there's no windows, we're going to have the feeling of natural surveillance. So another strategy to try to get out there. And then especially to use local artists, you know, and these are some of the buildings. We did have Perry's Liquor here clean up their building. So if you look at that today, it looks different. It's just kind of interesting because I don't know that encourages business there. We're trying to work on Easy Pond here, but this Easy Pond actually occupied this entire units. And so what I'm highlighting is, yeah, they're actually in all these. And that, you know, just, you know, part of this permit is trying to encourage, you know, keeping up with the locations, particularly if you have one of these types of businesses. Just coming back to Colfax and Havana, you know, the 7-Eleven here, it's just the way it was constructed with the back of the building, just a wall. So you've got kind of open parking lots, just again, some of the area. And this was actually a septic change they did. This was a step that turned it into a ramp to try to discourage people from sitting there. But yeah, just kind of a dead space. Also in that area, when you look at Colfax, your lighting's way up above pedestrian path. So, you know, if you want it to be a pedestrian corridor, ideally you'd have your lighting up here, but it's also behind the tree. Lighting is huge. Denver's upgraded their lighting after. So once you cross Yosemite, if you do that at night, and you pay attention to it, you'll see a huge difference between what's in Aurora and what's on the Denver side. But again, there's always cost factors, of course. But you know, particularly in the Colfax and Havana area, we've got, you know, 3 of our payday loan businesses there, and I think we have 10 in the whole city. And saw one study that talked about correlation between payday loans, transit stops, and crime activity, and just kind of looking at, you know, putting red boxes on kind of the spaces that, you know, maybe weren't ideal in the original site plan for that location. So talk about the initial build environment. So that kind of builds on to the next step, which is risk terrain modeling. Another way of looking at things where you start looking at the operational environment as well as the built environment. And, you know, in Atlantic City, they talk about you know, using kind of this strategy to put focus on location rather than offenders. And so they talked about violent crime being down 20%, but also arrests were down at the same time. And then Wichita adopted it, and there's been a number of cities that have been looking at this. And there. So as I mentioned, it's a spatial diagnosis technique. It's just kind of getting that data together to kind of see what areas to focus on and what those risk factors are in those areas. So Kansas City, for example, gas stations, I think, were a high risk factor, and that impacted some of the city policy, but also some of the strategies as to what they would focus on. So getting kind of back more into the permit and the concepts related to risk terrain modeling on that, and then, you know, trying to use that methodology to support this strategy, as well as evaluate it over time. These are the types of locations we're looking at, and you can kind of see where they're kind of mixed throughout the city, but obviously in commercial corridors, but particularly, you know, in the Colfax corridor, very concentrated up there, and not as balanced a retail environment as you would have throughout the rest of the city. So the proposal in the permit, it's 300. This is originally this was sponsored by Councilmember Jurenski. Councilmember Coombs has now agreed to sponsor this, and reviewed these spacings with her as well. And so this is what we propose in here is 300 feet spacing between the operations. So that means that for new operations like a liquor store, if it wanted to go in, it couldn't be within 300 feet of a convenience store or 300 feet of a pawn shop or 300 feet of a payday loan business, and separating that out. Putting them 1,000 feet from any of the extended occupancy motels, 2,000 feet between the same types. So we're already at 1,500 feet on liquor stores, 2 miles on pawn shops, This would then, extend the liquor stores to 2,000 feet. Vape stores is 2,000 feet, but that's also in the tobacco retail ordinance. I mean, it's kind of spacing those out. And then 500 feet from major transit stations. We look at the high risk after midnight uses a little bit differently, and just to kind of address those in those areas, because we think that, those types of businesses, if ran well, can have some congregation with them and actually do some activity support. But just kind of making sure that if they're going to go into one of these areas, that they're going to bring it up and not do the opposite. And then not permitting these types of uses in retail centers that are vacant or looking rough, with the idea of trying to encourage those retail centers to invest, to bring in, maybe restaurants and those types of operations before they start to fill it out with these types of operations. So how we determine areas of elevated risk is where the risk train model would come in. We'd look at those crime statistics mixed with what our retail environment looks like, and then bring in those high risk after midnight uses as a socioeconomic impact permit. And then just making sure that before they open, they are considering those SEPTED factors. And then we'd apply SEPTED, actually not necessarily immediately required. We do require code compliance, which a lot of what your codes that code enforcement enforces, do come back to SEPTED anyway, but SEPTED would be a mitigating or aggravating factor if they're having nuisance activities at one of these locations. Again, we could revoke the permit if there's pattern neglect or code violations, public nuisance. Having those operations follow an operational plan if they're in an area of elevated risk, or the discontinue operation for more than 6 months. Talked about automatic issuance. We have proposed a $138 fee and renewal that goes to fund the risk terrain modeling software that we can then use to fund this scientific approach to it. Go ahead. This is some maps of the areas. This is a 1-mile stretch of Colfax corridor, very high concentration of these types of businesses. So we'll just kind of run through these because I think you've seen these before. And then this, you get 1/2 mile gardens, just using that as contrast, very healthy retail environment. There aren't a lot of concentrations of these uses. In talking with the retail development people, retail centers generally don't like to concentrate these uses because it does have an impact on attracting people to their center. Peoria, Mississippi, I know this area is getting a little more challenged because the Safeway has now gone vacant and the Walgreens in the upper corner. And if you know this center, it's looking pretty rough. And you can really see them start to, that's a retail center that allows a lot of those types of uses. And this one up here in the corner, and we have had, some issues, certainly some issues with crime there. And I think the last couple of years, there's been at least one shooting per year, I think, up in that corner on the upper right in there. And I believe this is an area of focus for police as well. Hot spot. So.
Just a quick question. I think there's a pattern in terms of the call volume of some of those little motels, but you're not classifying those within.
We do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, they're classified as one in here. But again, that just helps you kind of in the future. And then if they aren't keeping up with their code compliance, they could potentially lose this permit. So that is one of our categories.
Okay.
Extended occupancy motels. Hampton and Chambers, I know this is a focus point for Councilmember Lawson, and just you've seen a lot of concentration of these operations in that area. Southlands is just to, again, for contrast, you've got a better part of a mile here, and you just don't see a lot of concentration of it kind of over in here. And so gives some ideas of kind of, areas and what they may feel like. And then a next step with this, what Councilmember Coombs had asked would happen would be that there would be more outreach done, and potentially with the BAB, if they'll agree to host a outreach meeting for it. I think a lot of this would impact landlords in particularly. Existing businesses may actually see, to some extent, some benefit from it because it's spacing requirements for new businesses. So probably focus on that. So questions with that?
Questions for Trevor?
Well, Councilmember Hancock is passionate about promoting these family-friendly hookah bars. I don't know what you're.
Cut it out. Yeah, we want the whole family there. Thinking about Colfax, because as you know, that's concentration, as you had indicated on the map. The new DDA in the development area down there, do you foresee that maybe attrition of some of those businesses or moving some of those businesses may mitigate that concentration of those predatory businesses down in that area?
Yeah, and obviously that's really an area where we've seen a ton of this concentration. What's amazing is these businesses have been there a long time. Yeah, the liquor store's been there since the 1960s, when you see a lot of attrition actually in the other businesses in the area. Restaurants are kind of going in and out. There's actually not a lot of them in that area. I do think, and one of the things I've heard from some of some business owners have some concerns. It's, difficulty getting people down here, and it's kind of risking when, like the People's Building, for example, where he really has like 5 pawn shops right in that immediate area.
Right.
I think, over time, hard to say, I think, like I said, it's, at least you can kind of stop the, maybe the additional ones.
Right.
From wanting to move into the area when spaces open up, and try to encourage the, maybe a different retail environment.
But it's when they sell, right? That's when the regulations really come into force.
Yeah, they would be, as long as they continue operations, they'd be grandfathered in. So they
What if they
could,
sell to another?
even if they sell,
Oh, even if they sell their.
if they sell, yeah,
So
I
it's really
think
about new people, new entrants.
new entrants, or, it discontinues operations. So say you change one of those out, then you can still have 4 pawn shops around there, but then you wouldn't be able to have another one in there, or, it's maybe another vape shop or something.
Okay, so the focus is on it's about things getting worse versus things changing for the better, right?
Yeah, it's kind of
But then too, like for that store that looks like it's vacant right down the street from the Fox Theater.
so.
Having them put windows in that building and making it more attractive, so it doesn't look like an abandoned building.
Yeah, it's kind of sits, and that unit right now sits between Cerebral Brewing, which, is very bright, big windows, and your Fox Theater. And then you just kind of feel like, oh, I'm just kind of walking through a little dead spot right here, and not all the lights are working there. And so, we're trying to have a healthy walking corridor. What we're going to do is encourage, this encourages these types of businesses where, maybe they kind of have their clientele and they don't feel the need to dress up maybe as much as a restaurant does, for example. And that appears, to be the case with kind of how they're showing themselves at the moment.
Are they being compliant and changing those windows and everything out, or have they completed it yet, or?
Not so far.
So
We're working on it.
what do we do, because, they're being resistant and following the rules? What do we
Yeah,
do?
so some of these operations, for example, the liquor stores, they have a liquor license, so we can use that as leverage. Fortunately, with the tobacco license, the standards you passed actually require that. Required to maintain those premises in good, so we can focus a little bit more on that. A little bit unclear with the pawn shop regulations. I am telling them, because these are code violations, that, we can look at your pawn license until you take care of that. We've been on them for several months and haven't seen a change yet. But particularly with like Harry's Liquors, for example, we caught them serving somebody who was heavily intoxicated. Selling it, we used that and said, you know what, along with this violation, we want you to clean that facility up. That other liquor store, they were selling, we prosecuted them for selling drug paraphernalia. And, use that as kind of the time period to also say, hey, let's clean that up as well. But, some of them, it's, this, I think, makes it a very clear policy that, to be these types of operations, we want you to maintain your premises.
So what if a business, let's just say it's a liquor store, and then they go out of business? And then it's vacant for a while, and then the owner or the bank, whoever's, maybe it's repossessed, then are they able to do, do they have a right then to put another liquor store in there, even though if it's, say, less than 300 feet?
So Yeah, we put in here, if it discontinues operation for 6 months, that grandfather would go away.
Okay.
Yeah, I think even with this, with the liquor store, because of the distance limitations that you put in here with the 2,000 feet, I think if they have surrendered the license, even if it's not 6 months, I think we'd have a case to say, no, we won't accept another license application, which usually takes a number of months anyway.
Any other questions for Trevor? Thank you.
Sorry about the Hoover part. Was he asking?
Any objections to taking it to study session?
No objections here.
Family.
Family,
Study session. Thank you, Trevor, for that valuable information. So any miscellaneous matters are for consideration?
Yes, sir. You would like, I have a presentation on the Chiefs Community Response Team, if you'd like a brief understanding of what that is and how it functions and what it works. As soon as she gets it open, I'll get started. Okay. I want to let everybody understand what this group's about, what it is and what it's not, and really to me, the value and the importance of this. And this is incredibly, incredibly important. I don't know if you guys remember last June, Candace Bailey went on live stream, said that there was a lynching up at Del Mar Park, said that we had a young male black who was hung up in a tree at a height, had a hood over his head, and that is the information that went out. And the police are not investigating it. They're doing very minimal. And that was live stream continuous. It was going out. There was an investigator that was supposedly coming in, and this investigator that she has was so shocked by this that it shook him to his nerves. That was complete false. It was a complete false narrative. It was a complete misinformation. The individual who hung himself from that tree was a 45-year-old individual who migrated here from Asian continent. And again, he had prior suicidal ideations. He had actually tried to a previous suicide attempt 4 days before that day. And again, he was not hung high from a tree. He used a cord. He hung himself about 6 inches off the ground. Unfortunately, when I go to community groups and I talk and I bring that incident up, that's all that it is known for, is that there are lynchings in Aurora of Black members of our community. And that is the narrative. And I want to make sure, as the chief of police of this department, that individuals who are of color, individuals who are Black, don't feel that that is the reality of this amazing city. And so that is what this community group is about. It is also about other incidences. We had an officer involved shooting recently. Again, it was live streamed immediately. Information went out that there was no less lethal used. There was no de-escalation used. There was never a gun involved in this particular incident. All of that was a fabrication. That was put out by a Medina, and that was all false misinformation. There was no clarity to it. There was no facts to it. It was just simply somebody who has the opportunity to use a social media platform and basically impact an entire community. And so for me, that's where I wanted to navigate those waters and try to bring clarity and try to bring fact to situations that occur in this city, and situations that impact the population of this city and impact all communities of this city. And so that's where this is. This is really an offshoot of what AKCRT was originally meant to be. That was meant to be something that a chief could use to reach out, to have contact. Over the years, it started out with a good phase, but over the years, it got watered down to where it had no teeth. It was basically an opportunity for law enforcement to have a 5-minute discussion, and then it would transition to the fire department where they would have a discussion about what was occurring in their life, free smoke detectors or whatever. And then it would go to Parks and Recs, and they would talk about a new water park or a new water slide that's opening up in South Aurora. And again, the ability to really have a honest and open conversation and build a relationship was not there. So that was subsequently put on hold. And that's where this opportunity arose. And so when I look at the community, that's what it is. It's about a trusted conduit to our community. And our community is made up of a lot of people. Our community is not just made up of activists. It's not just made up of individuals who come and take all the air out of the room and shout and scream the loudest. Our community is 420-some thousand people. And I believe many of those are underrepresented because they do not have the voice. They don't have the opportunity. And that is what I am trying to bring into this. And so Again, it's about bringing visibility to it. It's about ensuring that all individuals within this community are recognized, and those communities have voice, and they have a government channel to understand exactly what's going on. If you go to the next slide, please. I mentioned why it's needed. Again, information sometimes moves faster than what can actually go out, and that is really a challenge. Social media allows for fragmented, non-validated, non-verified information. How many times have you gone on Instagram, taken healthcare information on somebody who's dressed in a schmuck? We don't know if that guy works at 7-Eleven or if he works at Stuckey's or if he's really a doctor, but you sit there and you look at it and you think, oh man, he must know what he's talking about with this vitamin supplement. That's the same thing with information that goes out by a lot of groups. It's not validated, it's not correct, and it's not really useful to the community as a whole. So again, the community leaders are already act as interpreters. They are their network that we really hope to get that broad spectrum of individuals involved. If you go to the next slide, please. The operational concept is that this is not a policy body. So again, this is not something where they're going to introduce policy. They're not going to advise or direct police operations. This is not related to the Community Advisory Council. That's through the consent decree. It is not related or connected to the monitor. They have their own mission to focus specifically on what is going on within the consent decree. That's what their role is. This is a much more global, much more high-level discussion about incidents that are occurring within the city of Aurora and trying to get clear and concise information to go back out. There is not any participation in the disciplinary process or decisions or investigations. Again, this is the city manager is working towards as the consent decree comes to a conclusion. The city manager is moving on independent monitor. This has no affiliation or no connection with that. They will have their own role, their own oversight directed by the city manager. That is not what we do. This is where they receive briefings from me, and then we look at challenging situations and how that impacts the community. You go to the next slide real quick, please. The role members, again, like I said, they serve as conduits to the community. They're selected based on demonstrated credibility, trust within their communities. The participation reflects existing leadership and engagement roles in the city, and they carry factual information rather than advocate departmental positions. And that's what I really want with this group. And I meant this sincerely. When this group was selected, it wasn't selected by a bunch of people that love the police. And everything we do it's wonderful. I wanted a group of people that would have an objective view about what we were doing, how we were doing it, and then be able to be lever pullers back into their community and relay that information back. I did not want a bunch of people who were bobbleheads who just said, hey, that's great. You know, I'm so thankful that we're getting this. I wanted people that, again, objectively would look at the information, take the factual data that we have at the time that we are providing to them, and then give it back to the community that they have influence over. If you could go to the next slide, please. The selection process, again, like I said, we looked at credibility within their own communities. We looked at civic engagement and leadership. That is incredibly important. Do they have trust within their community? And that's something that a lot of time in advocacy groups gets lost. Is there really trust? Do they really speak for their community? And I hear that term community all the time. Oh, we represent the community. We live in a world in policing of data. I live in a world where every stop, every contact, every use of force, every radio call is captured. Who we contacted, what race, what ethnicity, what sex, what gender. When I talk to a lot of people, I say, well, what exactly is that community? And they look at me like a deer in a headlight because they cannot talk about their community. They can not talk about the numbers that they represent. They can't talk about who they really have influence or impact over. They are just the biggest voice in the room. And so that's what this group is really hoping to kind of counter, to give voice to a lot of people who have never had voice before. On this group, if you could go to the next one, please. The representation, again, here's what you have. We've included educators, clergy, youth, advocates, nonprofits, representatives from neighborhood leaders. Participant represents diverse cultural, faith-based immigration, youth, neighborhood communities. I looked at the demographics of the city of Aurora. Again, it's 12.1% Black, Hispanic is 24%, white is 34.8%, unknown race is 9.5%. That's the demographics of the city of Aurora. This board right now, the way it's made up, or this response team, it's 33.3 Black, it's 16.7 Hispanic, it's 16.7 white, it's multi-race 8.3, immigrant population is 8.3, and then unknown or other is 8.3 as well. So again, this group is made up of a smattering of everybody within the community of Aurora. If you go to the next page, please. That's fine if you go ahead and skip that. Information and education, again, what I really want to make sure that this group understands and what they can really articulate back into the community is what is really happening in their police department, because this is their police department. This is all of our police department. And when we so glibly talk about, oh, there was no de-escalation, there was no less lethal, there was none of this stuff, or no, this is what actually happened. In order to be able to articulate that information out, you have to understand it. And so in law enforcement, we glibly throw out terms like less lethal and de-escalation, but do people really understand it? And that's what I want to demonstrate. I want them to understand the use of force policy and the procedures related to that and the legal standards that are connected in Graham versus Connor, Terry versus Ohio, all these other aspects that relate to that. I also want to make sure that they understand that when some officer is backing up away from somebody and stepping away and moving, that whether it looks like there's a tool involved in it or a munition, that is a de-escalation strategy. And that's what lots of times it gets forgotten. Also, police tactics, operations, what are community initiatives, and then major public incidents affecting the community. This group, again, is not going to only be for officer-involved shootings, major incidents that come up where there's not clarity to it or misunderstanding. It's also going to be a group, again, where there's concerns. So we have concerns about immigration. Does the Aurora Police Department work with ICE? Are they having this relationship with HSI? This is where I can sit down, and this is where I already have sat down with this group and explain specifically what a municipal law enforcement agency does in regards to immigration enforcement and what we don't do. And so again, it's not any misinformation or it's not spattered based upon what I heard, who he heard, who she heard it from. It's coming directly from the organization that impacts that operation. If you go to the next slide, please. What I hope to gain with this, and what I know we will gain with this, again, is transparency and public trust. And it's hope to improve the understanding of how police decisions are made and how they are not made. What is reality and what is not. I also want to provide factual context before misinformation spreads. On one of our real challenging OISs, it was really hard to get a group of community members together and to get the right community members together. This is what this group will hopefully change. So by getting these groups together, being able to give real-time, articulable, factual information, details, they can then take that information and disseminate it how they want to disseminate it. I'm not going to be there to control that. I don't want to control that. I want them to have their narrative, but I want that narrative to be based on facts and not based on what they perceive or what they don't understand that they don't even realize. It's also to encourage informed dialogue between high-stress incidences, which again speaks volumes about what we're trying to do, and then strengthen that transparency and that community trust. I went to an Ethiopian community event on Friday. An amazing group of people. It was Friday evening. And I got a chance to talk about our department, where we are, what we're doing. And in the back of it, a group stood up, and again, it was the same group that was involved, and they had a large banner that they rolled out and said, Aurora is where lynchers are. There was something related to Aurora and lynching. And unfortunately, it was that misinformation that, as I was talking about why are we having these discussions, why am I going to all these town halls, is to bring clarity to a very unclear and a very challenging subject. And that's what this group, again, I really hope can do, because to be able to sit there and say, you know, that information is not relevant, that is not correct, that is not what occurred up at Delmar Park, and be able to address that in that setting was amazing. But be able to do it more importantly in this setting where groups can take it back when it's not at a panic, when it's not at the heat of the moment, and they can say, hey, this is what your organization, your department is putting in place, is practicing, is trying to do in relation to community policing. Can you go to the next slide, please? Again, the structure where we are, it's informational partnerships. Our meetings we do every other month. And if and when a crisis event would occur, if we do have an officer-involved shooting, if we have specific information or details related to something that is truly compelling to the community, such as immigration, we'll convene if and when it's necessary and get those groups together. Information is shared on a legal basis also on what we can and cannot give out. There is some information that we can't give out because it's an ongoing investigation. It's going through a cert process. It's going through the district attorney's office. But I will promise that I will give out whatever information I can possibly give out. That's feasible, that's realistic, that's factual. The next slide, please. Again, this is a pilot program. This is like many stuff that we are trying right now in the city of Aurora and in the Aurora Police Department. It's meant to be a living document. I don't want something stagnant, and I don't want the same players involved in it, to be quite frank with you. The opportunity I had to meet with the San Salvadoran community last week. Again, I was able to get another individual who had a desire to be part of the board. On the Ethiopian meeting that I had on Friday evening, I was able to get another individual who has a desire to be on that board, who has not been represented, but now can have that voice. That to me is what this is about. It should be constantly evolving. It should be changing. We should be getting different faces. We should be having the opportunity to shed and to share what this policing function is, what is good, what's bad, what are we working on, what is relevant to the community that we are here to serve. Again, if you go to the last slide, I believe, overall intent, again, this is what it is, about misinformation, support and involved dialogue. And I don't expect all these meetings to be wonderful. I don't expect it to be bun cake and good conversations and talk. I really look forward to the candid conversations, to the hard conversations, to get information out and to bring clarity again to some very challenging discussions and some very challenging incidents that occur in our city. The one thing that I really hope to do out of all of this is for me, because I think it has been not as successful as I would like to see. I would like to see the entire community of Aurora be represented. And I don't think it is. I think that there are some incredibly loud ducks that get into the room. I think there are some incredibly boisterous people who don't allow factual, real-time information to be disseminated. I think there is an undermining of what occurs and how it occurs and when it occurs. And I hope to, again, bring voice to many people who have that opportunity that have not had that opportunity in the past. So I believe that is the last slide. And again, any questions? I would
Yes,
really
Chair.
like to hear.
Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to ask you this question directly. There's been some conversation that you cherry-picked folks on this board.
Yeah.
Can you address that?
Yeah, they absolutely were not cherry picked. They were done with members of our community outreach team that knew these people, that they knew they had credibility within the community. I have a list. I can give you that list of who they represent and what they represent. As I said, when I broke down the makeup of that board, again, it represents every race, every ethnicity, every demographic. It represents every sexual preference. We have it in that board. These were not cherry picked. These were people that were known to be civic leaders. They were people that were known to have voice in the community that they represent. But this isn't something, and I want to make that really clear. This was not anything that I said, hey, I only want people that are going to come in and tickle my ear, because that's not what I want. I want people that are going to have an objective view. And more importantly than just their view, that's their role is not just to hear it for themselves. Their role is to take that information and disseminate it back to the communities that they have influence over.
Is it from all the wards?
Yes. Yes.
So, I think we created the AKCRT 1982 following the LA riot, Rodney King. And I think that the failure of that organization was a lack of structure, that there was, people were never, the concept was the same as what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But people were never identified. So is it whoever walked into the room could say, I'm a member of the AKCRT to this day. And that's why it never became that tool, that legitimate tool to be able to disseminate information, to prevent misinformation that would lead to civil unrest like in LA. And so I really want to commend you for this, but I think that the differences between this and between the organization that we have that has not been successful is structure, is the fact that you have to say, you have to have a group of people that have that legitimacy,
Yeah.
that are designated, and it just can't be open to anybody who walks in the door, which is the case with AKCRT now, which I'm just, given the fact that we have this, I'm just not sure why we still have that, why that organization will exist after this is implemented.
Any other questions for Chief Chamberlain? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Any other miscellaneous matters for consideration? Seeing none, confirm the next meeting is scheduled for April 9th, 2026. And with that, meeting adjourned.
What about those families?